Welcome to this week's Sunday Moment with Coconut Oil, Stardust, and Dope Vibes. I am your resident fairy godmother, Tamara Angela. And this week, revolving doors and second chances. So, probably about 2 years ago or so, I every year I get what I call a year ahead spread. So I sit down with a friend of mine and fellow practitioner, and she gives me my card pull, my reading for the year ahead. And one of the months, the focus was no revolving doors. She said, when you recognize what someone has done, when you see them for who they are and what has happened, and you actually are very clear on the situation at hand, no revolving doors. We're not having the person come back. We're not opening the door for any other activity. There's just no revolving doors. And I was like, okay, so I did what I always did. I just kind of wrote it down. And then what I would do is go back through and just kind of do a little study and then always just see where that whole conversation would take me. And like clockwork, like every year, the lesson was pre-taught, and things popped up that showed me how to apply that word. But I started getting a little deeper into how that works, right? And what she was talking about and what the actual lesson was there about revolving doors, about how we set these spaces in our lives where we allow folks to just go back and forth in our energetic space, and how that differs from grace, because it's two different things distinctly, right? There are times when, as humans, we are flawed, we make mistakes, they are genuine mistakes. We can really rub someone the wrong way. All these things can occur, right? And then there are spaces where there are revolving doors. There are spaces where and I used to hate those revolving doors growing up. I saw them more when in the 80s growing up. I hadn't really seen them, in recent times, except for certain hotels. But I hated those doors because the timing of it all, it was like having to time being able to walk through that door. And then sometimes if you didn't time walking out, you would end up going back around in that circle. A lot of times we leave doors open, and with clients, I'll sometimes give the analogy that, we'll kind of leave the porch open and we'll leave the porch light on for people. And then when that porch light is open, they may get to the door and realize the screen door is locked, but you left the interior door open. So it's like they still have access. They're sitting on your porch. You've left the porch lit. There's still a space of comfort while they wait and kind of stare through the screen door and know that you're present enough to give them a little something. That differs from grace. Grace is more of you having compassion and empathy and wanting and needing to work through something with someone. And so this conversation also needs us to talk about endings and beginnings, and where there are partnerships, relationships, where things need to end, right? Where we have to be comfortable with something ending. We know with endings, beginnings are created as well, because it leaves room for new beginnings, but we don't necessarily have to end something here in these cases in order to look forward to a new beginning. Sometimes we just need to end something because the season is done, because it's no longer working. And there used to be a time where I felt like, I was like, oh, okay, cut the head off the snake. If something is done, you just don't go back. That's not true necessarily. There are lots of instances where people have falling outs and they can come back around and legit talk about it, move through feelings, and make a authentic mutual decision that, hey, I want to move forward with this friendship because the two people, or this partnership, because the two people involved are moving forward in a newness, right? There are two new versions of you moving forward in that space. The two old versions of you can't just pick up where you left off. There has to be some newness there. Where this differs from grace as well is that, you can extend grace to people and still say, I still need to set that boundary because this relationship in its format does not meet criteria for a space where I will lend my heart, my mind, energy. We can say that and still extend grace. We don't have to continue to allow people to trip up and trip over themselves in our personal space. Sometimes you have to release people and just say, or you need to be released. So you have a space of growth. Sometimes your space of growth doesn't need to happen in the other person's presence. They don't have to allow you that. These things all depend on circumstance, and they're case by case basis. So with this conversation, I definitely don't want there, because people think so linear nowadays. I don't want it to be that, it's like, oh, this is how this has to happen, because that's not necessarily what I'm saying. What I'm presenting here is that there's a couple things that have to happen here. There's a level of understanding. There's a level of clear communication. There's a level of forgiveness, forgiving the self, forgiving the other person. There's a level of desire for a relationship to move forward. And this is all under the umbrella of healthy. I am in no way, shape, or form talking about or advocating for people to move through unhealthy, toxic relationships that lack boundaries and that lack respect. That is not even the compass point for this for this conversation. It won't even be, I need to put that out there, because people will pick this up in their circumstance and say, oh, she's applying it to this. I am not. None of these conversations are ever geared towards continuing in anything that is unhealthy for any party at all. Every conversation is is seen through the compass point of something healthy. If you've never experienced something healthy, you've got to get there first. You've got to be open to that first in order to actually hear these conversations and apply them. We're never applying healthy coping skills and healthy attitudes and healthy mindsets to unhealthy relationships ever. We don't do that. And people do that. People will try that and say, oh, these things over here that work for something healthy, let me apply it over here in order to keep themselves in something that is not a healthy space of being. So I want to put that out there, most definitely. It's almost this space where it's like, I don't feel like, I hate that we even have to say things like that, but we do. We do. So this space of revolving doors and grace, I had to look at, because it's a boundary conversation. It's a forgiveness conversation. It also speaks to where you like to lend your attention and why. I've found that, and this is where you have to do your own personal work, your own inner work. I found that I was entertaining certain things because I liked these things that gave me a jolt, a thrill that felt entertaining. So I was like, oh, I'll deal with this within these parameters, right? I'll deal with it because I like this part of the entertainment and I'll deal with it from an arm's length away because I wasn't emotionally capable I didn't want to put myself in there fully emotionally. So it's like, I'll tap that. That's exactly what I got in response from these certain situations. You know, I got an arm's length amount of response. And, you know, depending on where you are in life, I mean, sometimes that's all you want and sometimes that's all you need. You're not trying to deep dive into every single thing. But what I found out was that I was also leaving a lot of tabs open. And so people will encounter you, have a great encounter with you. And then if you don't close that tab out, they're like, oh, let me just tap back in here. I find that happens a lot. And people will just call it conversation. It's not technically. It's a tap. And they want to, it's like, oh, I saw her over here. This is not equivalent to, hey, I haven't talked to my homegirl in a while. Let me dial her up and see what's going on. Like, let me catch up with her. It's not equivalent to that. This is, you know, oh, I saw you talking on a thread. Let me hop in your inbox and say something witty, you know, whatever. Here's some banter. And what that really is people wanting an energy exchange. They're wanting attention from a space that has drawn them attention before. But the reason why they feel like they can do that is because you've left the tab open. And so now you've created a revolving door of all these open tab conversations, which eventually drain you. They are attention stealers and they never lead anywhere. So you have to start looking at, why do you leave those tabs open? Why do you feel like those things are options? Because sometimes we'll have a lot of things laid out in front of us and none of them are actually options. They're just situations laying out there. So you'll have these situations just kind of laying there, not necessary to be there at all. And then they just keep reviving themselves. Then you're on this endless thing in this revolving door. Sometimes it never closed. Sometimes you never had the conversation about, like, you know, this really long term doesn't serve me. It did at one point in time, but I'm actually looking for something else. I actually need this other thing. Here's where I've been. Where have you been? To me, I feel like interactions within my energy field need to have some kind of purpose. Now, here's the thing. Everybody and every purpose isn't going to be something deep and long term, right? You can have a conversation with somebody and it be just what you need in that moment, and then you move forward. It filled its purpose. It's done. Excuse me. So I'm not saying that all of these things have to be long term, but there has to be some finality to it. Just leaving these things open says, oh, you can come on back whenever you feel like it. The ashe that's there, the energy that's there says, you know, porch light on, screen door open but locked. Come knock. That's what that says. So you have to be very aware of where you have planted your energy and where it just still remains open. Because these spaces, people will just plug back in. We all do this. So when I give these perspectives too, it doesn't mean that it's one-sided and people are only doing this to you. It means also look at where you may be doing the same thing. Where you may just be like, oh, well, let me just, you know what? I haven't talked to such and such in forever. It always felt great to talk over there. And you just kind of tap and poke. One of my girlfriends, she said, you know what? Sometimes people remember that poke feature that used to be on Facebook was super annoying, but people would just poke you. Not saying anything, not initiating any conversation. It's just a poke. It was like, hey, do you see me? Look at me. I'm here. It was weird. Why would you need to just poke somebody? What was supposed to be the response to that? And this is where a lot of people are with open tabs. They're just getting poked all day with no substance. And then wondering why they're drained because all these tabs are just open. They're just open. And so then it creates revolving doors where we allow people to just pick up where they left off. Every encounter needs to mean something or make some type of, like, it needs to make sense. And there needs to be, it's like, what do you want in this space? Why are you here? There needs to be, and that can be really uncomfortable kind of to ask people, like, what is this about? Especially when you haven't spoken to the person in a very long time. Sometimes people they don't know why they're there. Organically, if they're there, usually for a good reason to just like, hey, like we need to reconnect. And they're ready to put the work in for reconnecting. They'll do that. But these revolving doors stay open where, friendships, relationships, partnerships that needed to be dissolved. All of a sudden, here you go with a random text months later. You get these taps, these pokes. I call them energetic taps where people are just kind of like, oh, is she awake over here? Or, they'll text you something that was kind of funny within context of things that you used to talk about when there was a full, plug-in, and just trying to almost bait you. Let me see if I can still tap in over here. Some people want to know how many spaces they can be plugged into. That is exhausting, ultimately. And it's one of the things that I find when working with people that they don't realize how many spaces they're tapped into and how many people are tapped into them. It's important to have that understanding for yourself. how many of these spaces you've been plugged into, right? Sometimes we've walked away from spaces and forgot to unplug. So it creates these revolving doors. Oh, hey, what's up? No. Why? To me, I'm like, why do we need a hey, what's up after 8-9 months? There's too many ways to keep in touch. There's too many ways to keep in touch. And anything that you really want, you'll put the effort into. And no matter what that effort needs to look like for you guys, right? For you in that specific space, you'll keep the effort up. And so there would be no reason to kind of tap somebody after months and months and months. Do I have girlfriends where it's like, oh, we might DM each other randomly, text each other randomly, and then maybe every other month we actually have a phone call or get together? Yes. I'm not saying that you have to talk every day. I'm saying there would be regular communication and not these, oh, we haven't spoken in a while, and then they want to tap you and get full access. This is what happens too after ghosting. People get ghosted, and then the person doing the ghosting respects a full access through a revolving door. How does that work? How do you walk away from some space and then want access with a revolving door? If you're not careful, you'll open that screen door and give them access. This is different from grace. When you're asking for grace to have space of growth, there's actually a respectful conversation that should take place. You're not allowed to just do these things within a certain space and then kind of expect like, oh, my friends will give me grace to grow, or that's my loved one, that's my family member, they owe me, they're obligated. While I kick and scream and shout and go through these growing pains, they're obligated to still be here for me. No, they're not. No, they're not. People are allowed to continue to move forward with their own lives in your space of growth. They're not obligated to give you that room to stretch and figure all of that out in their space and in their face. Sometimes your growth needs to happen in an incubated space. And then you can come back and say, hey, this is kind of where I'm at right now. Does this line up? This is where I am. Does this line up with where you are? And yes, there are plenty of times where friends and family can support you through those moments of growth. You have those conversations, you talk about it, you share with one another, you pray over one another. And they've left space open for you, and you guys can pick right back up where you left off. That's okay too. Revolving doors happen when there is a lack of boundaries, a lack of conversation, and a lack of progression. And also a lack of insight. So it differs from allowing people grace to grow and go through things. That grace comes with patience, and it comes with open conversation as well. We've all been through things where we've, had something happen with a friend girl, and you guys had to talk it out, to work it out. Oh, for sure, these things occur. grace can happen there even when the other person is like, okay, we might need to take a time out. Or you've had the conversation during the relationship while the connection is still there and still working, and you're like, hey, let's work through this. That's more of the grace, where they allow, like, you're still allowed to be in that space. But people also have the right to say, you know what, I have to pause this right now because this situation was overload for me. I want the best for you. I want you to work through that. We need to pause this and come back and check the realignment. Check the alignment on it again. The revolving doors. Watching how you allow access to you. Watching how, how much energetic space you give out. How much you allow other people to come and go in your personal energetic field. That part is super important. What are boundaries you're setting with people? What I say all the time is, how much does it cost to experience you? Are you aware of that? Are you even aware that there are people who go through these revolving doors and they're just like, oh, I'm back again. I've popped back up. Oh, hey. How you have that start, stop, start, stop. And what that does mentally and emotionally for you. If these are spaces of discomfort, what boundaries do you need to put on that? What parameters need to be put on that? How do you close that tab? How do you give some finality to something that you've determined in your soul does not work for you? If there's any level of discomfort there and things like that, we have to examine that. When something immediately feels like, oh, no, like, ugh, when something immediately feels like that, you need to examine that. That is your intuitive soul saying, look here, this isn't right. This isn't going to work. This doesn't work for us. And so you have to examine what that's even about in order for you to properly set the boundaries and even find the verbiage for yourself. It's like even finding the words to say, this doesn't work. I don't care for this. Like, that is important. That's a huge important step in all of this. So I want you to look at where you may have left some tabs open, where you may have left things open for some revolving doors. And I also want you to look at spaces where maybe a little bit more grace needed to be granted. Because all these situations are totally different. Use that as a way of taking inventory and just starting to remove some things that don't need to take up any more energetic space. So, I mean, when we do that, that gives us way more opportunity to work intuitively and trust that intuition. Trusting your intuition and then trusting your inner voice is way easier when we don't have so many tabs open. Thank you for joining me this week on the Sunday Moment with Coconut Oil, Stardust, and Dope Vibes. I am your resident fairy godmother, Tamara Angela. Please make sure to share the conversation, and I'm so thankful for all of you who have been messaging me about how you love the Sunday Moment. It helps me to keep the momentum going. I really appreciate y'all for tuning in every week.